Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Code and Think. With me today, I've got Megan. Megan is a principal designer. She's got years of experience as a designer. She's helped organizations develop and build fantastic products. Meg, how are you doing?
Good, good. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. So,
Good to see you.
yeah, it's good seeing you. It's been ages.
So,
Tell us a bit about yourself and your journey as a designer.
I think it's a good story, and I'm not usually one to kind of self-promote, but what I like about my story is that I think it's something that I'm still continuing to be passionate about, and we can get into that a little bit. But I was a career changer coming into design. So I I kind of finished university and I went to go work at this company, which was a fantastic kind of starting ground, but it was a super startup. I think I was like the eighth employee. This is back in my Joburg days, and I joined, and it was really just I was at that point I just wanted a job. I didn't care what I was going to do. I just wanted to get like that paycheck and feel accomplished. So what I ended up doing was like managing databases, which is awesome because I'm still obsessed with Excel. And I still think it's like one of the most powerful tools. And I still personally use it for a lot. But I think my whole life was like just about numbers and formulas and in data entry and cleaning data and all of that kind of stuff. But eventually we wanted to close down that part of the business, and I was in charge with working with a single developer to build software of what I did every day. And they were like, why don't you just like design your job? Like, what's your process? At this stage, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know UX is a thing. It's like not very common. So I used the only tool that I had, which was a mixture between Excel and another Microsoft favorite, PowerPoint. So I designed the whole thing with the shapes in like PowerPoint, no jokes. And I worked with this developer, and we were kind of just pairing on this. And I'm sure I was an absolute nightmare because I didn't understand development. I didn't understand what it takes to build databases and connect that to a front end. And this was just one person. But I fell in love with the process. And I was like, how do I do more of that? How do I kind of, work with technical folks and build software and think about the journey and what actions need to take place. And I kind of really knew I wanted to get in that space, but still, once again, I didn't know that that was a job that people had. I wasn't privy to the industry. But eventually, I would say probably a year or so after that, I decided to go back to university. And I went to this kind of experimental school where there was only 10 of us. And it was all about development and design and building a business. So it was like kind of, I would say the closest thing that exists today is probably one of those accelerators. It's like when people have an idea and they get coached to kind of build on that. Anyways, that's how I landed up becoming a UX designer. I had a coach who I really loved, and he was in the field and kind of taught me about everything that, the way humans interact with software and computers matters, and how you remove that frustration, and all of that. And so that's what I did. I landed up freelancing for a little bit, and then I joined Thoughtworks, which is where I've been for the last 7 years.
Awesome. So based on your experience and your journey so far, what do you think it takes for someone wanting to get into the space of design? What do you think one needs to do to get into the space?
I think at the end of the day, maybe I'll touch on what I said earlier, which is career changing. And honestly, when I'm hiring and looking at folks to kind of bring to the team, so often those people don't have any sort of formal design academic background. We can look at anyone who's been in marketing, to anthropologists, to technical folks, to game designers. And I think the common denominator around that is just curiosity. I think anyone can, if you put in the time and effort, you can learn a design tool. So it's not about that. You know, I'm not looking for how fast you are at Figma or Sketch or InVision, or even if you know any of those tools, because that's such a small part of your job. Really, the big part is communication, I would say, is the number one thing. Telling stories, being able to take something complex and distill it down to something that people can grab onto and understand and have that path forward. So I would say if any of those are interesting to you, and if any part of that you feel like, you know what, I really love doing that, then I feel like you have a career in design. I feel like you can come and bring so much value to the table. Of course, you know, if you're super interested in visual design or research or very kind of specific speciality, there's always a place for you. But I find that really the ones that are the most successful, especially in the longevity of this career, because it's always going to change, is you have to kind of continuously being curious and being a good communicator.
That's interesting. Tell me a bit more about the storytelling part of design, because it's something that I've also been really interested in lately and that I want to improve on. How does storytelling fit into design?
Honestly, I would say it's the biggest part. I'll tell you a little bit of story of, you know, where I am in my career right now is really, I don't touch any design tools for app screens or websites or thinking about design systems, any of that really. I mean, there's a whole generation of folks who are brilliant at that, and that's what they should kind of continue doing. Where my career has evolved into is the art of communication and that storytelling. And I landed up on this project a couple of years ago where there was a lot of unknowns, there was a lot of ambiguity. We didn't have a clear path forward. We knew kind of what the mandate was, what we needed to do, and there was some scope and constraints involved, but taking that kind of first step over the ledge was do we do this? And I kept asking those questions. I'm like, well, why am I here? What do you want me to design? Like, what's the deal? And we just realized that there was so much more work and exploration and discovery to be done. So what I started doing was I started interviewing just anyone and everyone I could get my hands on who has any sort of knowledge around this. And I started using design tools and design thinking to formulate a story around those interviews. And what came out of that was this absolutely behemoth-sized file of an entire ecosystem of the top-down view or bird's eye view of what we're looking at, right? Like, what's our entire world? And it crossed over every side of the business, all the way from, you know, onboarding suppliers all the way through to the customer returning something. So, and it tapped into supply chains. It tapped into what APIs are going to be used to transfer some communication. It tapped into decision points, responsibilities, and really having something that seemingly complex to look at, but really easily digestible if you spend the time just looking at it, was a great way to tell that story of like where we at. It was a great way to kind of take something that seemed overwhelming at first when you look at it, and put it down in something that anyone could carry around with them. Anyone could kind of say, well, here we are in the process, so this is what we need to do. So I think that's really where storytelling comes in, is how do you take something that feels overwhelming or complicated and tell it in a way that's understandable.
You mentioned design thinking, and I think it's one of those things that sometimes people can just say design thinking and not really being sure what it is. Like what is design thinking, and why is it important to incorporate design thinking in business or in the way that we do things?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think it's one of those terms that I feel gets overused a lot, and so I tend to avoid it a bit. But I think if you have to distill it down to what it means, is how do you solve it? I think it goes back to so much of what I've just said. So it's really about breaking something down, almost reverse engineering it, and then building it back up in a way that makes sense, and making something, utilizing, say, ideation stations. So you have all these tools, right? Which is like, it could be visual communications, it could be, running empathy maps, it could be putting the user at the center of the problem, right? That you're not solving this to make more money. That's a byproduct of people actually enjoying your service, right? So I think it's all about constantly going back to what is the real problem we're trying to solve. And if you think about any sort of business in our capitalist society, it's not about lining the pockets, right? You're not hiring people to line the pockets of the CEO. That's not a vision, that's not a reason to be there. And so I think design thinking is about turning business problems around and saying, let's make our strategy about the people. Let's make our strategy about solving real problems for real people, and not about making money, not about reaching KPIs or ROIs or any of that. Those are great measures of success. But it's not success.
It's interesting that you talk about the tools, because just earlier I realized when we were talking about some of the topics that we could touch on, I was looking at more of the tools, and realized that as a principal designer, really your work is more around the thinking and the problem solving. The tools just enable you to get to the solution, but then you as a designer, you have to go through coming up with the solution. Actually, the tools are more of the implementation of the solution that you would have already created as a designer. So tell me a bit about the space you're in right now as a principal designer, and how your role has evolved from the work that you used to do before and to the work that you do now. How has that changed?
It's not a change that you expect, and it could be a range of things, that your environment or what you are looking forward to fulfill your career. I've never been one to kind of stick in my lane. I think and I think this comes back down to me being a career changer, is that I never really saw myself as just a designer. I'm sure back in the day, when you remember when we were working together, I loved pairing with the developers. I think even towards the end, we were rushing so massively to get this thing out the door that I was like, I'll write that one page and like commit code. And because I love everything about technology. I love everything about the software process. I love solving these big problems. And you're right, the tools are just there to enable me to get to that point and provide the most value as I see fit in a team of technologists. And so whether that's playing, the designer who's building out screens, which I honestly would welcome that opportunity again. Whether I'm any good at it anymore is a different question, but I would never say no to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think as you get more and more used to the industry, it never gets easier.
Yeah.
I mean, the problems are always there. It's so fast paced that it's just, I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, why is it still hard? I feel like I should know this by now, but the problems are different, right? But it's the space is just so ever changing that I think my growth has got to the point of solving different problems. Because I just felt maybe my value can be seen elsewhere because I have this experience. I've done the kind of building the apps, I've done the building the sites, I've looked at optimization, toyed around with design systems. And I think really where I started getting more and more interested is working with executives, not to convince them that design is important. I feel like that conversation is there and it's done. It's more convincing them, how do we do this in the most efficient way, and helping them break down some of the barriers that they have that's slowing them down. And that's often in these large enterprises process. Get rid of tools, get rid of process, start unscaling yourself. Don't scale anymore, start unscaling. Get back to the basics of what you're really good at and focus on that value. Don't try to be valuable to everywhere because that's what Amazon's doing. They're not cool. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. You actually reminded me of the time that we worked together, and I told you this before, that one of the things that really got me into design was, I remember seeing this web of interfaces that you had created and thinking, wow, this is interesting. So this is this is where it all begins. But then obviously there's been a change in tools from the time that you were working directly with screens. What can you say about that? Do you think that the tools that we've developed so far have kind of bridged the gap between you as a designer and the clients, and also design and the development team? Do you think we are there yet, or we still need to close that gap?
It's like night and day. I think we were in a really interesting situation, right, where that was one of the most aggressive timelines I've ever seen for a software project. We were a relatively small team, and I feel like we had to do all of this and all the things in 6 months. It was a pretty wild ride, and I don't know if you remember, we changed tech stack halfway through. I mean, I that's still one of my favorite stories because I can't believe we actually pulled it off.
We did.
So I think, I mean, back then, and it could have been my, I just didn't know. It could have been the nature of the project. It could have been the timelines. But we used nothing. We didn't prototype. We didn't have any sort of like software handover between design and Dave. It was really just me pairing with Dave's and communicating through these screens. And I look back at it and I'm like, by no means was that perfect or potentially even good. I mean, if a design had to pull that off today, like, and do that, they probably would be fired from their job, to be honest, because consistent, when you're designing over 100 screens with 3 different platforms, it's going to be pretty hard to be consistent without a design system. It's going to be pretty consistent without a second pair of eyes kind of looking at it. And you're also doing this for the first time, and you're also evolving as the brand is evolving, right? So you're constantly having to update as they're updating themselves. So I think you're right. Maybe it's something I should be proud of because I was working within the constraints that I had, but the tools today are so incredibly powerful. Now, would building a design system in a greenfields project make sense? No, not with a single designer, not when I'm designing everything from scratch, because design systems are overhead, right? Design systems are about scaling, they're not about launching. And so it wouldn't have made sense, at least in my mind, to kind of focus on building out a design system, having one of you guys like pair with me and building out those React components potentially. Or I think we were using Xamarin at the time. So we chose the path of utilizing system OS design systems, right, back in the day. So we were trying to just be kind of completely, let's bootstrap this basically off of the OS. I don't think we had a ton of like custom components or anything like that, or a little like some of the little things that we drew and built. But there was, and I think that's the right approach when you kind of launching things, because you don't want to take even longer, right? Just because you think this is going to scale, it might not. That's okay. But I think you have to prioritize. Now, should we have maybe, if we could redo this project today, I think prototypes using something like Figma or Zeppelin or those really cool tools that I've never really had the opportunity to play around with, and it kind of does all this fancy stuff, then use it. Use whatever makes your job easier, for sure. But we were scrappy.
Cool. So in the design world, what trends are you seeing that likely to gain a lot of traction in the years to come? And those that you're looking at now and you're like, this is the way to go.
It's hard to say around design trends just because I'm not completely in tune with what's happening in the design world, but I can say from my colleagues what I think folks are talking about. So design ops is a big thing. So kind of how do you operationalize design? Companies are growing so massively, and they're hiring designers en masse. So what does that look like? It's really fascinating, and there's so much literature out there of the best way to build teams, and how do you have multiple teams? Do you have full stack teams? Do you have front end teams versus back end teams? Do you have design pods that feed multiple dev teams? There's no right answer, right? There's no magic bullet that's going to work for you. So I think it's about trial and error. And what I would say, and I'm by no means a design ops expert, but what I would say is that it's about maybe starting at a smaller scale, testing that out and seeing the effectiveness, and knowing what are you measuring? What
Mm,
matters to you?
mm,
Is it efficiency? Is it employee happiness? Is it better communication? Is it,
yeah.
experimentations? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And find your baseline and start kind of playing around with different models of how and what works. And I would also say, when it comes to design ops, or at least design teams, is don't be sad when things fizzle out a
Mm,
little bit at some point. Because if it proved value for a couple of months, that's value. That's valuable.
mm,
Try
mm,
something else, right? To keep people engaged. We're human beings. We're not robots, right? We're going to be interested in something and then we're going to move on to the next thing.
yeah.
And businesses should kind of figure that out, and be adaptable to that, you know.
Mm,
Um, I think the other big topic that I'm seeing a lot is kind of ethical design and ethics and tech as a whole. And
mm,
a huge shift. I feel, you know, um, so many of the folks coming into the industry expect a lot more from organizations, whether that's around ethics, thinking about green tech,
mm,
what's our impact to the environment. Back in the day, you were like, oh great, we're saving trees, we're no longer using paper, technology is awesome. Well, now Bitcoin is like, has more emissions than some countries,
yeah. Yeah.
like carbon emissions as some countries, right? So
Mm,
you've got to really start thinking about, what is the impact of what you're designing? What is the impact of what you're developing to the world?
mm,
And also, does the world need another app? Does the world need another thing? Oh my
yeah.
gosh, like, we've got
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
cut this out, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
just, I don't want to put any more crap in the world.
It's interesting that you're still taking this stance because I remember a while back when we were talking about this, and you're like, "Do we really need to develop another app? Let's try a web application. If it doesn't work, then you know that
Don't do tech for tech's sake. Don't choose it because it's cool and fancy when Excel does just fine.
yeah,
I mean, I remember there was this one client of mine. They were trying to solve knowledge management within their division. And I mean, it's an extremely, extremely tough problem to solve. And I think the whole world can empathize with just knowledge management and how tough it is. But there's also librarians. Like, you can also just hire like someone to kind of sort out your assets, sort out your documentation.
mm,
You don't need machine learning and AI to like pick up on like natural language processing and like figure this out for you, right? Like, you can also just hire someone to like sort it out. In their particular instance, that wouldn't have worked. But I just think sometimes we think we need this big bang expensive solution from some fancy vendor. In
mm,
reality, if you just distill it down to the real problem,
yeah,
you might be able to solve it quite quickly and easily and cheaply.
mm, mm. I like that. Cool. So wrapping up now. So for people that might be listening in and interested in getting into design, um, what are some of the paths within design that you you, you can talk a bit on?
Yeah, I mean, I think don't be afraid of the title when you're looking for jobs. If you find that this is something interested in you, the world is moving away from tertiary education, and rightfully so. I think specifically in the States, it's screwed so many people over. And I mean, even back home in SA, right? It's just,
Mm,
it's so difficult to get into these like universities, and it's expensive, and then you have to think about housing and everything like that. And I really can't stand the idea of that any organization is like, well, you need a degree and you need like 12 years of experience and you need to tick all these boxes, and then we'll also pay you nothing because you should be grateful for this job. It's just any organization that's like selling you that, then you don't want to work there. I think self-learning, career changes, and the motivation to do that while you also have another job told me so much more about who you are as a person versus some like piece of paper from a university. And this comes from someone who like went to too many universities. I'm telling you right now, if you can tell me that you went and you read all these books and you did these online courses and you attended these meetups or talks and you practiced all while holding down a job and looking after your kids, for me, that's way more amazing. And so I would say don't let going to school get in your way. I think we're in a time and place in this planet where there's awesome stuff out there, and I think if you have an interest in it, just go and look and get into find a niche or find an area that you love and start applying for jobs.
Meg, as always, it had been a while, but then it's as if we just instantly up. And
just yesterday.
Yeah, this has been really great, and thanks for your time. And I hope we continue to keep in touch. And yeah, oh, one more thing. For people that are looking to follow you and what Meg is doing, where can they find you?
I think if anyone's interested in connecting with me on LinkedIn, I'm pretty active and responsive there. So if anyone wants to chat or connect with me, I'm really open. Cool.